All right, today we're going to dive into something called Dialectical Behavior Therapy, or DBT for short. This is a really powerful science-backed therapy that's all about helping you handle intense emotions and, maybe more importantly, build a life that you actually want to live. So, let's get right into it. Here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the exact problem DBT was built to solve. Then, we'll get into its core philosophy, this idea of a both-and approach. After that, we'll unpack the 4 sets of skills that really drive the change. And we'll wrap up by talking about the ultimate goal of all this work. So let's just start with why you're even here, right? You're probably looking into DBT because you're dealing with emotions that feel totally overwhelming, and you're searching for some real, practical tools that can actually make a difference. Does that question hit home for you? That feeling that your emotions are just in the driver's seat, calling all the shots, pushing you to do things you wish you hadn't later on. It's a really painful place to be, and it's the exact problem that DBT is designed to tackle head-on. You know, when we're in a ton of pain, we find ways to cope. It's only human. Maybe that's shutting everyone out. Maybe it's lashing out. Things that give you a little relief in the moment. And that makes total sense. But here's the catch. Those strategies often have some pretty big long-term costs. They can mess up our relationships, create more anxiety, and pretty soon you're stuck in a cycle that feels impossible to escape. So the big question is, why? Why does this happen? Well, DBT has a really compassionate, science-backed way of looking at it called the Biosocial Theory. And let me be clear, this is not about blaming anyone. It's just a model to understand how we end up with what DBT calls emotional dysregulation. That's just the clinical term for when emotions feel way too big, last way too long, and are just really, really hard to manage. It basically breaks down into 2 key ingredients. First, biology. Some people are just born with a higher emotional sensitivity. You feel things really deeply, more intensely than others. And second, an invalidating environment. That just means you grew up in a place where your feelings weren't really understood or taken seriously. Now, when you mix those 2 things together, a sensitive person in an environment that doesn't get it, you get the perfect storm for emotional dysregulation. The most important thing to hear is this: it's not a character flaw. It's a mismatch between your biology and your environment. And that understanding is the perfect lead-in to what makes DBT so different, its dialectical approach. This is a whole new way of thinking that helps you get unstuck from that rigid black or white view of the world that often comes with intense feelings. So, what does dialectics even mean? In this context, it's pretty simple. It just means that 2 things that seem like total opposites can actually both be true at the same time. Instead of seeing things as either or, DBT helps you start seeing them as both and. Finding that synthesis, that middle path, is how we start to break out of those painful, rigid patterns. Okay, so this is the central dialectic in DBT. It's about holding these 2 truths in your mind at the exact same time. Truth number 1 is acceptance. You are doing the absolute best you can with what you've got right now. And truth number 2 is the need for change. To have the life you want, you need to learn new skills, try harder, and do better. By holding both acceptance and change, we can dial down the shame and build a real foundation for moving forward. Now let's see how this dialectical thinking applies inside our own heads. DBT talks about 2 states of mind we all have. First, there's emotion mind. That's when your feelings are in complete control. It's hot, it's fast, it's reactive. Then you've got reasonable mind. That's your logical, cool, problem-solving side that just looks at the facts. And we all bounce between these 2. But here's the twist. The goal is not to get rid of emotion mind and just live in that logical space all the time. The synthesis, that middle path we talked about, is what DBT calls wise mind. It's that place where logic and emotion come together. It's that gut feeling, that deep inner knowing, that respects the facts but also honors your feelings. Learning to access this wise mind is a huge part of the therapy.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we find wise mind and start making real changes? Well, that brings us to the most practical part of DBT, the 4 core skill modules. This is literally the toolkit you're going to build.
These 4 modules are taught in a really structured way. Mindfulness is the foundation for everything. Then you build on that with distress tolerance for crisis moments, emotion regulation for day-to-day feelings, and finally, interpersonal effectiveness for your relationships. So let's quickly break down what these do. Mindfulness is all about learning to pay attention to the present moment without judging it. Distress tolerance gives you skills to survive a crisis without doing anything to make it worse. Emotion regulation is about understanding your emotions so you can change them. And interpersonal effectiveness teaches you how to ask for what you need and say no while keeping your relationships and your self-respect intact. So, what does this look like in the real world? Well, in distress tolerance, you'll learn a skill called TIP. It's an acronym for changing your body chemistry fast using temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and paired muscle relaxation. You also learn radical acceptance. Now, let's be super clear here. Radical acceptance does not mean you like or approve of a painful situation. It just means you stop fighting the fact that it is the reality. Because you can't change something if you don't first accept that it's real.
And in interpersonal effectiveness, you get these really useful frameworks, almost like a recipe for a tough conversation. A great example is Dear Man. It's an acronym that walks you step by step through how to describe the situation, express how you feel, assert what you need, and reinforce the other person. It just gives you a clear roadmap so you don't get lost. All right, let's bring this all home. Learning all these skills to manage pain is absolutely crucial, but it's not actually the final destination in DBT. The real point is to move beyond just surviving and towards something so much bigger.
This quote from Marsha Linehan, the creator of DBT, really says it all. The point isn't just to stop doing things that hurt you or to feel less miserable. The point is to proactively, intentionally, build a life that feels meaningful and worthwhile to you.
And here's the key. A life worth living is defined by you, not by anyone else. It's not some generic checklist. The therapy helps you get crystal clear on your own values, what really truly matters to you, and then gives you the skills to go out and build a life that's actually aligned with them. And that leaves us with the single most important question you can ask yourself, the question that this entire therapy is built around. It's not just about asking it, but about using these skills to start building the answer one small step at a time. So what would that life actually look like for you?